The Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, Article 52. The Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. This article of law is clearly bringing forth the place, the operation of law that is attached to the Constitution Act of Canada, and it is clearly expressing that this Constitution Act is indeed the supreme law of Canada. The operations of law that are found in this Constitution Act are what governs Canada. It is the supreme law that governs Canada. When we look at the word supreme, we see that it means superior to all others, of the highest quality, of the highest character, of the highest importance, last or final or ultimate. So this is what the Constitution Act of Canada is. I'm going to say it again. The Constitution Act of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is, to the extent or to the degree of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. These laws that are against the Constitution Act of Canada, they have no power to be enforced upon you. As a human being, if they are overriding your fundamental rights and freedoms, then they are of no force or effect. They cannot force you into recognition as the legal person. The Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, is the supreme law of Canada. They use that word specifically, supreme law. Now, there are other laws in operation in Canada. There are laws that are in operation in each province, and there are federal laws that are in operation within Canada. Now, it goes on to state that all these laws, whether they're the highway safety codes, the municipal taxation codes, any act or regulation, or any code that is in operation, these laws here are all secondary. They're all beneath the Constitution Act of Canada. And if, when we read these laws here, we find inconsistencies, we find operations of law that go directly against the Constitution Act of Canada, then it states that these laws are of no force or effect against us. We cannot be held to them if they are breaking our constitutional rights. And I will say, for a fact, many of these laws here are breaking the rights and freedoms that are attributed to a human being within the Constitution Act. We have been, if you will, granted, or Canada is under obligation to respect natural rights, if you will, human rights and freedoms. These rights and freedoms stem out of international obligations, and Canada expresses these obligations, does their part by enumerating them or listing them in the Constitution Act of Canada. However, afterwards, when they make these subsequent laws, they remove the rights and freedoms of the human being, of the man and woman, and cause them to operate only as a juridical personality, and strip them of the rights that were found here. But in the Constitution Act, it clearly states that if these laws are stripping us of our rights and freedoms, then they're of no force or effect. That this is the supreme law, not this. In the Constitution Act of Canada, we see several players being brought forth, for we read sentences like this. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. Every citizen of Canada has the right to vote. Every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, remain in, and leave Canada. The right of citizens of Canada. Any person charged with an offense has the right. Every individual is equal before and under the law. So we clearly see different subjects or players: everyone, citizen, person, and individual. When you look in the Constitution Act of Canada 1982, an important fact or an important point to take note of is the fact that there are several players being expressed within this law, within this Constitution Act. It was not by coincidence that this is taking place. It was because of the obligation that Canada was under to the international laws that we see these players or these subjects being brought forth in the Constitution Act. In the Constitution Act, we find that there is a subject or a player that is designated an everyone. We see that there is a player or a subject that is designated a citizen. We see that there is a player or a subject that's designated a person as well as an individual. Now, I contend, and it clearly shows forth in this act, that each one of these subjects have different rights and freedoms, or different entitlements, or different privileges, or different duties and responsibilities, or are placed in a different class of subjects, class of persons. Now we know that everyone, if you've watched my videos, it includes the human being, the man or the woman, okay? And the justice system of Canada has taken this fact into consideration, is aware of this fact, and has declared this fact. Therefore, the human being, everyone, has been granted their natural rights through the Constitution Act. However, the Constitution Act of 1982 is not only, or does not only apply for a human being. It does not only express natural rights. It also is applicable upon corporate bodies, that being Canada, and also the person, or the citizen, or the individual. For when you look to the legal definitions of the word citizen, a citizen means it's a person who has pledged their allegiance to either a political party or to a sovereign. In Canada, it's to a sovereign, the monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. In America, it's to a political party, if you will, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, whichever one is ruling. Now, a person in law can mean a human being, depending on the context, or can refer to an artificial person. That artificial person that is a corporate body, that artificial person that is given certain rights and freedoms of a human being, that is treated more or less as a human being. An individual, we see the same operations of law. We see that an individual can refer to either a corporate body, an artificial person, or it can refer to a human being, because you can be one human being and you are an individual. So within each of these subjects, each of these players, you have different rights, different freedoms, different duties, different obligations attached to it. We, as human beings, as men and women, find the natural rights in expression through the word everyone, through the subject and player everyone. In the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 2, it states that each state party to the present covenant undertakes or has the legal obligation to respect and ensure to all individuals the rights recognized in the covenant. Now notice that the player or the subject being brought forth was the word individuals. They didn't use the word man. They didn't use the word person, citizen. They brought up the player individual. When we break down this word individual, we see that there are two. It can break down into two subjects. Either the human being or that artificial person, that citizen. Now, the human being within the covenant has been granted rights and freedoms. These rights and freedoms, they stem from the Magna Carta, from natural right, The artificial person, the citizen, also has rights and privileges, duties, and allegiance to Her Majesty. But within the covenant, you're going to find what rights, freedoms, privileges are, if you will, placed upon the artificial person, and what rights and freedoms are granted or are available for the human being. Now, the State Party Canada had the obligation to respect and ensure that whatever rights we are operating from, whether it be the human being or the artificial person, whatever rights we are operating from, that they would respect them and ensure that we could stand and have our rights respected. So it's very important to take note that the subject or the player being brought forth here is individual. And individual breaks down, when you look at it legally, into two: human being or artificial person. And these different designations here have different freedoms, have different duties, have different rights that are granted or can be claimed. Canada had an obligation. They were bound by this international instrument to ensure that the rights and freedoms that we just spoke about, that were accorded to the individual, whether it was branched off to the human being or branched off to the artificial person, that these rights and freedoms, through the constitutional process of the State Party Canada, would be secured. And that this constitutional process, when they brought it forth, that it would be in alignment, it would be with the provisions of the covenant itself. So those rights and freedoms, remember those rights and freedoms that we find in the covenant, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that were granted to the individual, well, they have to come out in the constitutional process of Canada. And if they didn't, then Canada would be under, if you will say, default. They would be straight off the bat not fulfilling their obligations to these international instruments. Now, in the International Covenant, it states that to fulfill this process of the rights and freedoms that have been granted to us, they can adopt laws, or they can use other measures to make sure that the individual's rights and freedoms are respected. When we look into the Constitution Act of Canada, we clearly see, as we were speaking about in the beginning of the video, that there are several players being brought forth. Remember everyone, remember citizen, person. Well, these players are the different expressions of the rights and freedoms that were granted or brought forth in the covenant. And that's why we're seeing different subjects or different players in the Constitutional Act. Some are being granted rights and freedoms as an artificial person, and other times we're seeing the expression of human rights and freedoms, natural law, coming out through the constitutional process of Canada, through that Constitutional Act.
Individual. As a noun, this term denotes a single person, as distinguished from a group or class, and also, very commonly, a private or natural person, as distinguished from a partnership, corporation, or association. But it is said that this restrictive signification is not necessarily inherent in the word, and that it may, in proper cases, include artificial persons. See also person. As an adjective, individual means pertaining or belonging to or characteristic of one single person, either in opposition to a firm, association, or corporation, or considered in his relation thereto. Person, a human being, also termed natural person, or a person can mean an artificial person, an entity such as a corporation, created by law and given certain legal rights and duties of a human being. A being, real or imaginary, who, for the purpose of legal reasoning, all in the mind, is treated more or less as a human being. The Interpretation Act of Canada, Article 35, it states that in every enactment, the word person, or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. So they're saying when you use the word person, it includes a corporation. Now, when you look to the legal meaning of the words includes, it states that the inclusion of one is the exclusion of another. The certain designation of one person is an absolute exclusion of all others. So here, when they say that the word person includes corporation, it is a designation of one, that being the corporation, and it is an absolute exclusion of all others, meaning the word person in every enactment cannot refer to the human being. It can refer only to the corporation, for the certain designation of that word excludes all others. The Interpretation Act of Canada states that every provision of this act applies, unless a contrary intention appears, to every enactment, whether enacted before or after the commencement of this act.
The Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, is the supreme law of Canada, according to their own laws. After that, if you come in line, what would be next under the Constitution Act of Canada is what you just read, the Interpretation Act of Canada. Now, this law, this enactment, takes the place and applies to all other enactments, all other laws. So whether it's the Canadian Transportation Act, the Bank Act, the Bills of Exchange Act, whatever you find in the Interpretation Act of Canada, this will apply upon those other enactments. Now, in the Interpretation Act, you find that the word person means or includes a corporation. And then we found out that the word includes explains that whenever one thing has been mentioned, that is it. That is what it's referring to. And it leaves no room for anything else to take its place. So the word person in all the enactments that we read in Canada, whether provincially or federally, the word person will always define the corporation, that artificial person, that citizen, unless in that act that you are reading, there is a redefinition of the word person, a redefinition, and then it means something else. It doesn't only mean corporation. If you look in the Citizenship Act or the Canada Transportation Act, you'll find that the word person is not redefined. It's not redefined. So, therefore, based upon the Interpretation Act, it is referring to the artificial person. It includes only that corporate body. Now, when you look into the Bank Act of Canada, you will find that the word person has been redefined. There is a redefinition of the word person. And now, in that act, the Bank Act, the word person refers to either the natural person or the artificial person. So the redefinition of the word person in the Bank Act overrides the definition of the word person in the Interpretation Act. Now, if there hadn't been a redefinition in the Bank Act, then the word person would only refer to that corporate body. But because when you look into the Bank Act, it states clearly that there is indeed a redefinition, and they tell you now what the word person means in this act alone, in the Bank Act alone. For example, you couldn't take the redefined word person in the Bank Act that now includes the natural person and try to apply it to the Canada Transportation Act. Because when you read the Canada Transportation Act, you wouldn't find the word person redefined in this act. So based upon that action, based upon the fact that there is no redefinition of the word person in Canada Transportation Act, the original the secondary law next to the Constitution Act of Canada, the Interpretation Act of Canada, the word person, how it's described as corporation, wouldn't be in operation here. It would be in operation here.
As you see in the Citizenship Act and Canada Transportation Act, concerning the word person, in these acts, there is no contrary intention. There is no attempt to redefine the word person. Therefore, the Interpretation Act applies to the definition or designation of what a person means in these acts. Again, in the Bank Act now, you see that the word person means a natural person, an entity, or a personal representative. The word person in this act has been redefined. We now see a contrary intention when compared to the Interpretation Act. The word person in the Bank Act now also designates the natural person. In the other acts, as with the Interpretation Act, the word person only designated a corporation and was not redefined. Now we are seeing a different expression and designation of what a person means in the Bank Act. In the Criminal Code of Canada, you look at the word municipality, and it states that a municipality includes the corporation of a city. They use the word includes. That means that a municipality only means a city, and that it includes the inhabitants of which are incorporated or are entitled to hold property collectively for a public purpose. The inhabitants, the human beings, which are living in the municipality, have been incorporated into the corporation of the city. Therefore, the word person in the Criminal Code of Canada is referring to that incorporated person, that artificial being. Now, when you look at the legal definition of incorporation, it means the formation of a legal corporation. So the municipality is actually a corporation, and the name of the municipality is the name of that corporation, and you, as a person, are being considered an incorporated being with the municipality, that corporation. This is what is transpiring in law. As twisted as it may seem, as sick as it may seem, this is exactly what they are doing. Instead of allowing you to operate from your rights and freedoms as the human being, they are designating you as an incorporated artificial being that is part of the corporation of your municipality, and they are operating as executor, or, excuse me, they are operating as administrator. They are operating as the executive power in this corporation, and therefore are trying to control you. In the Constitution Act of Canada, everyone, that human being, has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of association, and everyone has the right to life and liberty. These rights and freedoms allow you to break free from what they have done. They allow you to walk away from not operating as that incorporated being, as that artificial person. In the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 8, it states that no one shall be held in slavery, and no one shall be held in servitude. If the city, the municipalities, the government agents, the government bodies, the ministers are saying to us that we have no choice, but we have to be held in servitude as part of a corporate body, as that citizen, as that artificial person, then they are failing to allow us to express our fundamental human rights and freedoms that are brought forth within the Constitution Act of Canada, that supreme law of Canada. In the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, Article 32, it states that this charter, this supreme law of Canada, it applies to the Parliament and Government of Canada. It applies to the public officers, police officers, It applies to the ministers and all who are working in the de facto offices of this so-called corporation. It applies in respect of all matters within the authority of Parliament. This charter, which is the supreme law of Canada, also applies to the legislature and government of each province in respect of all matters, every matter, within the authority of the legislature of each province. The rights and freedoms that are contained in this charter apply even for the justice system of every individual province.